Are you a Sonic the Hedgehog fan? Now, whatever your response was there, it was probably a pretty uncomplicated yes or no answer. Either the idea of the Sonic franchise is one that appeals to you or it doesn't. But regardless of how you answered that first question, here's one that's a lot more difficult. Do you like the Sonic the Hedgehog games? While on the surface, those two questions seem similar, you'll get very different answers to each one, because the history of Sonic video games is, let's say, complicated. On the one hand, it was a revolution in the early 90s that proved it was possible for another major platforming mascot to give Mario a run for his money and challenge Nintendo's unquestioned dominance on the market. On the other, it has been some of the most broken, terribly designed, and all-out disastrous games in history. It makes it one of the most fascinating franchises in existence, purely because, from some angles, it's absolutely baffling that it still exists at all. Around the turn of the millennium, plenty of other mascot platformers found themselves on death's door after just a single bad entry. Bubsy never recovered from the disastrous Bubsy 3D, mascots like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro dropped off from a few games that weren't even that bad in hindsight, and even Banjo Kazooie failed to make it out of the noughties, despite their mainline games getting nothing but high praise. The nostalgia cycle has brought some of those franchises back to the forefront now, but somehow, Sonic the Hedgehog just never went away, despite arguably having much worse and more high-profile disasters than any of those other mascots. To the point where, to this day, there are plenty of die-hard Sonic fans that will openly admit to disliking more than half of the mainline games. How do I know that? Well, dear viewer, that's because it's me. I've been a Sonic fan the whole time. And let me assure you, there is no single thing in this fanbase that we can agree upon. There are only very vague consensuses as to which games are the good ones, and even on the negative end of the spectrum you have a worryingly growing portion of fans claiming that the notorious disaster Sonic 06 was good actually, just because a fan project came along and fixed a litany of its fundamental flaws and cut out all the bad parts. Point is, there is arguably no other franchise that has survived as many abject failures in its day. I've mentioned the buggy and unfinished Sonic 06 already, but how about Shadow the Hedgehog with its frustrating gameplay, awful writing, and a level of edge that was laughable even by the standards of the mid-noughties? Then we got the Wii games, Secret Rings and Black Knight, which fundamentally misunderstand what makes a Sonic game fun, by switching up the gameplay and slowing the pace of everything down. And, in case you thought the franchise was done was buggy and unfinished messes, the Sonic Boom games return to remind you that Sega can still break anything with ease. And yet, Sonic remains a pop culture icon, because in 2026, the franchise isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Regardless of what you think of the movies, they are undeniable box office hits, with each one getting more and more hype behind it thanks to the franchise's endless cast of recognisable characters. And they are turning a whole new generation of kids into Sonic fans, even if they've never played a single one of the games. Yet, those games are on something of a hot streak recently, with pretty much everything major released in the 2020s receiving at least decent reviews, if not great ones. Sonic Frontiers gave a fresh feeling to Sonic's 3D platforming, even if the draw distance is a little dire. Sonic Superstars rebooted the classic 2D gameplay in a way that renewed the sense of fun and energy, even if the co-op mode is utterly broken. And Shadow Generations is pretty uncomplicatedly great. And then, if you add to that extended media like the IDW comics that are being near universally well received, to the point where the original characters from it are becoming prominent enough to poke their heads into the video games, and there is a bit of a feeling that Sonic the Hedgehog is in something of a renaissance right now. Yet the question remains, how the hell did it even survive this long to reach a renaissance, when so many other series were left in the dust for far less extreme failures? At what point does a gaming franchise become too big to fail? So let's start off with the most basic argument, which is that ultimately, despite having a large adult fanbase, Sonic is a series aimed at kids, and kids don't know any better when it comes to game quality. Personally, I've always thought this isn't giving kids enough credit when it comes to their ability to discern quality in media, but I have to admit that anecdotally, it holds a bit of weight. I mentioned the portion of the fanbase who are currently trying to defend Sonic 06 earlier, And a decent chunk of those people are fans who played the game as kids. The bugs, the awful writing and endless load times just sort of went over their heads, and they enjoyed it for what was there. And now, in their 20s, they come online and find out it's one of the most hated games of all time, and they just don't see what the fuss is about. The problem is that, despite where this franchise is aimed, I'm not sure there are all that many kids who are into it anymore. Admittedly, the movies have probably helped swing this back towards the younger generation, but in fact, Sega seems to be well aware of how much of its fanbase are adults now. A game like The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog doesn't happen when you're purely trying to appeal to kids. After all, that was the whole reason the mascot platformer died out in the first place. The audience who were playing them in the 80s and 90s grew up, and the developers aged up their games alongside them. That's why Naughty Dog went from making bright and colourful games like Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter, to gritty story-heavy action titles like Uncharted and The Last of Us. All those other mascots died out in the noughties as the audience got tired of them, with Mario only surviving through Nintendo's relentless pursuit of innovative game design and quality releases. Yet, the noughties were arguably Sonic's worst decade in terms of game quality, so why did it survive? So okay, let's look at the more cynical side of things. Why, ultimately, does any media IP survive? Because it makes money. Okay, so how does a series with failing games continue to make money? By branching out into other mediums, of course. Just take a look at Pokémon. The anime and trading card games are juggernaut institutions entirely unto themselves in the modern day, to the point where no flop in the video game space would make any noticeable impact on their success. And as a result, Pokémon will continue to thrive, even when Scarlet and Violet is an ugly slideshow of a game. So, what was Sonic doing in the 2000s? Releasing Sonic X, arguably its most popular cartoon ever, and while this one was firmly aimed at kids, it did the necessary job of keeping Sonic relevant enough in pop culture that even a catastrophic flop like Sonic 06 wasn't going to wipe out the public's interest in Sonic as an IP, which kept it alive long enough for things like the successful Sonic Rush games on the DS, and, more importantly, the big pop culture crossover of Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games to bring Sonic back to the forefront. And this isn't the only time this would happen. The Sonic Boom games were notorious disasters, with fans hating the character designs, while the big Wii U game set to renew the franchise was arguably more broken than 06 before it. Yet, the Sonic Boom animated TV show was brilliant, with genuinely funny writing full of fourth wall breaks and an animation team that did a great job bringing the redesigned characters to life. That show is still remembered extremely fondly by the fanbase today, and it carried Sonic through its gaming failures. Which brings us to the modern era, where Sonic has the relentless marketing machine of Hollywood behind it, making Sonic just as big a pop culture icon as he always was. Of course, we couldn't go without a good old-fashioned disaster when the initial character design was revealed, but after that speed bump, it has been smooth sailing for the blue blur on the silver screen, with all of his furry friends getting new leases on life as they're reintroduced into the cultural zeitgeist via each respective movie. Knuckles was never a popular enough character to get his own show before, but Hollywood made it happen, and made it a success. And that right there touches us onto what is arguably Sonic the Hedgehog's biggest strength, its characters. Now, I don't mean this in a, oh, aren't these characters so complex and interesting way. That's never been a concern for this series. But at some point, Sonic Team stumbled upon the perfect template for designing characters that stick out in people's minds. Bright and simple colours, big expressive eyes, alongside one or two unique physical characteristics that make for a unique silhouette. It's simple character design, but it works perfectly. The Sonic characters are mascot costumes. They stick out in your mind because they're so eye-catching and recognisable at a glance. And while their oversized features might make them difficult for animators to work with, it makes them extremely memorable. There's a reason everyone was upset when Sonic Boom tried to redesign them, even if I think those redesigns were actually quite good in hindsight. Combine that with one or two key character traits and bam, those characters are never going to be forgotten, yet can still adapt to a wide variety of scenarios. And once established, can easily be used to tell interesting stories. Hell, as early as Sonic Adventure, the franchise was examining Tails' role as Sonic's sidekick, and his over-reliance on his heroic friends. One of the things people are most curious for about the upcoming Sonic 4 movie is exactly how it will portray Amy, as that character has undergone a massive shift over the last decade. For ages she was defined by this all-consuming one-sided crush on Sonic, but as that concept has gone out of fashion, she slid more into this reliable, kind-hearted friendship role, and potentially becoming the badass girl of the group in this mostly boy-oriented series. Then there's the unfortunate but undeniable role the internet has played in keeping these character designs in people's mind. Have you ever played that internet game where you type your first name into Google followed by the Hedgehog? Seriously, do it now and even people with quite rare names will find a litany of Sonic-based OC designs made by teenagers with DeviantArt accounts. For creative kids who are finding ways to express themselves, the Sonic character design template is just irresistible. With a few key features kept in place, all you need is to give your character a unique colour and a few distinguishing features, and bam! You've got something that looks like it could fit in that world, but feels unique to you. And sure, we can all sit here and laugh at how cringe it is, but some of those artists are now working for Sega, and creating some of the cool new original characters that people are desperate to see get video game representation. Just look at Surge from the IDW comics and tell me she wouldn't be right at home on a DeviantArt page labelled Sophia the Hedgehog or something. That's not to disparage the design, I mean that as a compliment. This Sonic OC trend may be weird to outsiders, but it's things like this that let young artists develop their style. When something as fundamental to a franchise as the base elements of its character design become a wide-reaching aspect of online gaming culture, that's when you know this IP is becoming completely unkillable. And that engine only gets stronger as time goes on, and new character designs inspire more young artists who eventually grow up and design even more cool new Sonic characters. Just look at the new furry friends that have been added to the Sonic roster over the past decade or so. Tangle the Lemur, Whisper the Wolf, Trip the Sungazer. Hell, even though Infinite is a terrible villain in Sonic Forces, you've got to admit that that character design kinda rules. Sure, it's unlikely any of these characters will become as popular as Knuckles or Shadow, but it keeps this world growing in ways new fans can attach to. That overwhelming sense of personality and charisma in every new design is what will keep a fanbase deeply engaged, even though those characters are only in extended media for the time being. If anything, that's a great way to test things out before exposing them to a wider gaming audience. To once again use the Pokémon comparison, you can say exactly the same thing about that franchise. It doesn't matter how much Scarlet and Violet's technical faults put people off, because the moment Nintendo releases the Winds and Waves trailer, the whole internet lights up with fervent discussions about the new starters, who they like best, and what they hope they'll become when they evolve. When a fanbase is that big and that deeply invested, you can have multiple flops in a row and a big enough portion of the audience will keep coming back for more. In fact, in Pokemon's case it's even more extreme, as while Scarlet and Violet may have been a critical flop, it still sold incredibly well. The fanbase's mindset stopped being, that sucks, I'm done here. Instead it becomes, that sucks, I hope the next one is better. Because even though this experience disappointed them, they've already decided that they'll be coming back for the next one. But okay, that's easy enough to say about bright and colourful franchises like Sonic and Pokémon, who use new characters to lure people back in. But what about other big AAA series? The ones that lack a loyal audience of kids to prop it up, and yet still thrive through high profile failures. Pretty much every new Call of Duty game seems to get panned these days, but I think we all know that franchise is well beyond the too big to fail threshold at this point. And it doesn't have the same things that Sonic can lean on to keep people coming back. The boring, cynical answer is marketing. Call of Duty in its peak got so popular that it became one of the de facto gaming IPs that crossed over into mainstream pop culture, to the point where clueless parents will use COD as a shorthand for any shooting game they're trying to talk about. When you have that kind of grip on the average household, your brand name isn't going to die as long as you keep regularly promoting it, regardless of how the final product actually performs. But it's not like the series is pressing on through bad sales. People are definitely still buying these games, and while the aggressive monetization practices of the last decade mean that they can make more money off of fewer players, that doesn't entirely account for it. I think it's more that Call of Duty, and indeed any franchise that survives through bad entries, have already proved themselves in the bloodbath that is the modern games landscape. killing off all the other franchises until it's the only one left. Now, I know COD isn't the only military shooter franchise left around, but while Battlefield may still be here as its closest point of comparison, the design philosophies of these games are quite different. Battlefield is about the wide open chaos of a huge war, while Call of Duty focuses on smaller skirmishes. Meanwhile, all the other franchises that thrive on those small skirmishes, like Medal of Honor, have been resoundingly defeated by Activision's giant. And perhaps that gives us the answer we were looking for when it comes to Sonic the Hedgehog too. During the great mascot platformer purge of the early 2000s, Sonic was riding high with the adventure games, and it successfully killed off all its competition, so that when it had its own disasters later in the decade, it survived simply because there was no one around to kill it. Mario was the only major competitor in this ecosystem, and with Nintendo only releasing one major game per console generation, there wasn't much direct head-to-head fighting going on, which is probably why Mario would instead extend a hand of friendship, bringing them together in the Olympic Games. In a way, it's survival of the fittest, except in this case, it's less about consistently being on top, and more about just being the most popular at the right time. If Sonic was suffering its major disasters back in the late 90s and early noughties, maybe it would have been taken out back by Crash Bandicoot instead, and we'd all be horrified about his live action appearance. Once an IP has overcome that hurdle and injected itself into all aspects of pop culture, it's likely going to stay here for a very, very long time. Mario's turning 40 this year, Pokemon's turning 30, hell, even more modern feeling franchises like Assassin's Creed are coming up on 20 years. And when something has been a pop culture staple for that long, even if it was for negative reasons, you can be confident that it isn't going anywhere.